they might want to add something substantive as regards why they had this thought. Maybe they've got an idea for improvement, etc. And then when you come to the reporting stage, it's really useful because you can gather up all of those initiative ideas and then go through them one by one. So just to give the people attending an idea of the type of topics, it was the effectiveness of the board, the conduct of the board meetings themselves. We asked them to assess the quality of the information we were presenting to the board. We looked at board performance, board secretary performance. We asked about their comfort with the oversight they were getting on management, ability to input on strategic matters, and also their involvement in stakeholder engagement. So those were all the key topics we asked about. When we finished that process, we wrote up a report with an exec summary, shared that with the board in advance of the next board meeting. And then the final step was to meet with the board, talk through those results, and also talk through some of the ideas that board members had tabled to improve things. And it's important at that stage, of course, to gauge whether there is consensus in the room on those initiatives, because one board member might think something's a great idea, but maybe not everyone does. And through that process, then we were able to align on what were agreed were the things we wanted to do going forward. And I know that it led to, in the following board meeting, one of the requests was to have a strategy specifics session, and we did that at the next opportunity. So, it does, in fact, make an impact.
Now, because we have done the first one with you, I remember Hawkama and IL, and then the second one you did it on your own. How can you compare the differences? I mean, did you see the same kind of outcome and results, or do you see some differences? Please.
Yeah, look, I think you probably get something slightly different from each process. The internal approach probably has the benefit of the regular voice, and perhaps that leads to quite an open conversation because there's no one external in the room. Now, having said that, when Hawkama were there, we had a good discussion also. I think probably then what the outside lead can bring is market knowledge, understanding of what other people are doing, and also just the guidance on what are the best practices. Have you thought about this? Quite often the board members in that situation will say to the outside advisor, well, what have you seen other companies do? And you might have a wider experience having participated in outside processes. Personally, I think they're both valid. I think I know that the law says you have to have an external one every 3 years, whereas, so I think it's quite good to have a combination of both because you get different things from different approaches.
Thank you so much. When actually this regulation came out a few years ago, we felt some sort of sorry, or not sorry. I mean, we're sympathetic with company secretaries because it adds to what they have to do. So Amanda, maybe you can tell us about the role of the company in this exercise and your own experience with running this exercise for Aramex, and tell us the lessons learned that people can benefit from. Amanda, please.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ashraf. Actually, my experience is very similar to Sean's experience, where we had Hawkama conduct our board evaluation in 2021, and after that, it was done internally. So we gained experience from the external evaluation that Hawkama conducted, learned a few lessons. Also, as Sean said, Hawkama provided insight on what other companies are doing, the experience and the knowledge. It was better than doing it for the first time internally. So the role of the board secretary primarily is to identify the purpose of the evaluation. So are we doing it only to tick a box, like to fulfill the regulatory requirement, or are we doing it to solve for a certain problem? Or are we doing it to assess the board and make sure that everything is done in the right way, following the good governance practices, making sure that the board is conducting its role effectively and efficiently? So ideally, it should be the third one that we're targeting, the effectiveness of the board, not only ticking the box so that we will report this in our governance report. So the role of the board secretary starts there, identifying the purpose. And then we go to the step of gathering the information. So first we have a meeting with the board, we identify the purpose of the evaluation, we emphasize the confidentiality and the integrity of the process, because this is a very sensitive topic where the board members will be very candid and open about their experience and their thoughts of the board. So I started over there. We conducted a session, we spoke about it. I introduced the questions, the survey questions. So the information gathering process was an interesting one because mostly it was the same topics that Sean referred to, including board composition, effectiveness, oversight. Is the board aligned with the mission and the vision of the company? Is the board aligned with the strategy of the company and the management? Are we going all in the same direction, or is there a conflict anywhere? And then after analyzing, after gathering the information, we came to the process of analyzing. And we did something interesting this year where not only did we make an assessment for the board and the committees, I did the analysis in a way where the committee evaluates itself, and then when the board evaluates the committee. So sometimes when the committee members themselves, they analyze and they give their feedback on the conduct of the committee and the effectiveness, and then what the rest of the board views that committee doing. So this is interesting when there is a conflict there. This is an area of improvement where we need alignment or better reporting between the committees and the board. Not only the board, because the board meets obviously less times than the committees. The committees, they do the work on the ground and report the same to the board, and things are discussed at the higher level. So it was interesting to see what the committees thought of themselves rather than what the board thought about the committees. And then we would have, sorry, Dr. Ashraf, are you going to ask something?
No, I just wanted to ask again the same thing like Sean, because again, one of the challenges is, or about the openness. So now when you conducted this exercise internally, how did you make sure that the board members and committee members are really open to mentioning whatever they wanted to mention to somebody from the company, basically? How did you ensure this openness from board members and committee members?
Okay, so because our board is mature, and in general, when people are candidates for a board position in a publicly listed company, you would assume that they have the maturity, and when there are no sensitivities or very little sensitivities, you would assume that they would be open and candid. Now, of course, the openness would be more and easier and clearer when it's with an external evaluator. But still, my personal evaluation or experience was that my board was candid and open, and there was also room not only for multiple answer questions. There was room for statements, and I received a few of those, and they were very constructive. They helped a lot in identifying areas for improvement and some focus items that I would need to focus on as a board secretary and work together with the board to address them.
Well, thank you. Perfect. I mean, Philip, now Amanda mentioned something which is extremely interesting, which is the maturity level of the board. Now, internal versus external, what are the key factors, if you like, that will enable the company to make sure that with the exercise done internally, it's done properly, and it really fulfills the need for good evaluation, not just to take the box that we have done assessment internally. So, from your own experience in this field.
Yeah, let me just think that one through. So basically, I think it's pretty universally accepted that one of the key factors is the support of the board chair. I mean, without that, the whole process is largely academic and frankly a waste of time for the board and the people involved. You really do need a chair who's also willing to accept and understand that there may be sensitivities that are highlighted, particularly around board composition, for example, and the fact that there may need to be changes. Very often the changes aren't just because there's an underperforming board member, it's because the business has seen new strategic opportunities, wants to expand into new business areas, confront new market challenges, and may need to redefine some of the skills and experience on the board. So that's the one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, in my view, is that you have to have somebody such as someone who's acting or fulfilling a role of corporate secretary who really has the trust and respect of the board. That's really important, so that the board sees that person as much as a confidant as it is just somebody who's there to fulfill various statutory and administrative functions on behalf of the board and the board chair and the committee. So that becomes another very key factor. If you do have a corporate secretary who carries that level of gravitas with the board, that becomes a very important component, particularly for internal reviews, in other words, as Amanda just briefly described just now. But also, they're a very critical factor in external reviews, because when an external reviewer comes in to do a review of a board, they also provide the context and the circumstances, and very often, because they are what you might call a silent observer in the boardroom, they see things and observe things that they can share with the independent evaluator who's been assigned for that particular project, to sort of also help direct them to what are the questions that the board should be asking themselves, or that should be asked of the board. So those, for me, are the two critical aspects. The third aspect is that at the end of the process, there should be some actionable outcomes, and those actionable outcomes need to be routinely followed up and pursued in whatever cycle you're following. So the sort of typical cycle I've been involved in is you'd have an independent evaluation, and then you'd have 2 internal evaluations and following probably every financial year of the organization concerned. And then very often you would use those follow-up internal evaluations to in some ways test the progress from what was seen as actionable outcomes from the independent evaluation. And perhaps there may be other issues that have surfaced in the meantime, but you use the internal evaluations as much as a follow-up to see that these outcomes are being implemented, and if not, to understand why they're not taking place. And also that helps start to develop a level of accountability on the part of the board, and also enables the chair to see that this process is actually put to full value.
Thank you, Phil. Actually, I do have a follow-up question, but because I know Muhammad has to leave in like 7 or 8 minutes, so I just wanted to ask you, Muhammad, from your perspective as ISCA, I mean, you have seen now the disclosures which are happening by companies. Number one, how did companies do in the area of board evaluation from your perspective as a regulator? And also, what would you like them to disclose? I mean, ideally speaking, in the report the annual report, for example, by the company, what kind of information you'd like to get out of the evaluation as a regulator?
The report should include, let's say, a fair information about the board member. Let's say the report should include an information that gives a good indicator to the shareholders about the board member, about his performance, and what if he's going to compare, as has been mentioned previously with Amanda and Philippe, that if you're going to compare this board member with the next year, you can compare his performance through the corporate governance. So we need to understand that is he performing in the right way? And if there was some comments about his performance as a board member, did he improve himself for the next year? So this is the most important, and the shareholders should know what he's doing through the company. The most important, Doctor and Amanda, I love what she mentioned, is that the board should accept the comments that was received either from the internal or the external. Here, as a regulator, we're putting a rules and regulation, but at the end, if the company doesn't or the board member doesn't believe on what has been mentioned, they can click on the boxes that we have fulfilled what has been requested from the regulator. But here, when we add anything through the corporate governance code or through our requirements, we're here to support the company, support the requirements that should be done from them. But they need to believe that this is for the benefit of the shareholders, benefit of the company, and benefit of them. Because a board member here, he can be also a board member in another company. It means that if performing in the right way, the other companies may approach him to be a board member. So this is, a good indicator for the board member, and this will motivate them to work much more stronger. And the evaluation information that has been disclosed, this will be as a benchmark for them, even through the listed companies here, or even not the listed, the other entities in the market, and even internationally. So this is, if they will think about it in a positive way, it's a very positive information, and for the board member to announce it on a yearly basis. They should think about it, the board member, as this thinking, not the thinking that they will know about me much more and what I'm doing through the listed company.
But so far, Mohammed, as a regulator, I mean, what is your assessment of the experience in the UAE? I mean, how did companies respond? Are you happy with that? Do you see that there are improvements? What kind of improvements you would like to ask for to see happening in the market? Your feedback from the experience in the UAE so far?
Till now, the listed companies, they had some inquiries in this regards, how we can implement and so on, since the changes of the code has been announced or implemented in January 2024. And what will be the assessment information and the information that will be available for the public will be announced in the 2025. So what will be announced through the listed company will put some requirements through the template of the corporate governance code, but at the end, all the companies should be flexible with adding more information that represent the true information about the board and represent the company in the right way, and the shareholders the right information. Some companies, they felt that this is no use of doing this information, but I remember even 15 years back, they say there is no use of implementing the corporate governance. Now they're thanking us that this requirement as a mandatory requirement is really helpful for them, and it has been protected. It's protecting all stakeholders in the company, even the shareholders and the board secretary, the board of directors. Some of the cases, through the corporate governance requirement, they use, let's say, the related party transaction. It has been defined through the corporate governance code. This has been protected the right of the shareholders. And all information and even the evaluation will give a boost for the company to be much more stronger.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mohammed. I know that you have to leave in 1 minute, so I apologize to everyone. If you'd like to ask Mohammed, please write the questions for us, and we will forward to Mohammed and come back to you. Now, Sean, about the disclosure, what do you disclose in your case, and what do you feel comfortable disclosing, and what you don't feel that comfortable disclosing about board evaluations?
Yeah, look, I think that's one that we're all going to have to consider carefully.
Yes, Mohammed. Sean, just Mohammed.
Now,
Thanks, Mohammed.
That you had a great information from my end, and I'll be waiting for questions if are available. It was
Thank you.
Thank you, and see you soon, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you. Sean, please go ahead.
Yeah, look, I think that's one we're all going to have to consider carefully as we move into this new disclosure regime. Obviously, the new guidelines come out earlier this year, and I think really come in fully into force in 2025. You have to strike the right balance, of course, about not giving too much specific information around non-public confidential information. But taking Mohammed's notes, and I made a few notes myself as well as other people on the call about what ESCA expect, I think it's really to demonstrate to shareholders that there's a proper process that's being run, that the board are taking the process seriously, participating in that process, taking the time to consider how best to improve, setting some actions, and then implementing upon those actions. So that's what we will look to do as we get into this next phase. One other thing that I think is worth mentioning as well is, and it helps the discussion, sometimes as lawyers, compliance professionals, governance people, you almost look past the 90% of things that are going amazingly well, and you look straight to identify the things that are problematic. In these discussions, what we tried to do was reflect in full the conversation. And that started with saying, these are the things that we think we're doing really well. And hopefully your board agreed with that assessment. After all, it's the consolidation of their responses, so they should agree with that assessment, given they've submitted on the forms. But take a time to note what's going really well. And then that opens the conversation of, okay, we're doing great, but how can we do even better?
Well, actually, I mean, this is one of the challenges we face sometimes at Hawkama when we do the board evaluations, when it's all green. So board members are very happy with everything, and we are the best board. You know, everything is fine in our case. And then you start to say, you know what, this is too good to be true. I mean, it cannot really be like this, because you know about the company and you do board evaluation for them, and you know that you have issues, but nothing comes out in the questioning from the survey.
Yeah.
So Amanda, I mean, how do you communicate the results of the board evaluation to your other stakeholders? So, okay, now you have, you know, ESCA in one hand, but there are other stakeholders. How do you communicate the results of the board evaluation to them?
Okay, so mainly it was done in the governance report, but we did not go through the specifics. We went through in general that we conducted a board evaluation with a focus on X, Y, and Z, but we did not go through the exact results and what came out of it. But you can put two and two together when you read our what the trainings the board did, because mostly we focus our trainings on the results of the board evaluation and where we find areas for improvement. For example, we find that, let's say we are lacking in strategy, you will find that we conducted a training on strategy. Take this as an example, not as a specific, but this is how we communicated mostly. We did not really disclose the details of the findings or of the exact areas of improvement to preserve the confidentiality of the process and of the board members' feedback on themselves. So this year, I don't know how we will do it. Perhaps we can go more in depth given the new guidelines.
Now we have a question from Pata. I mean, the question is, how long do you leave for the survey responses when you do to your board, especially internally? 1 week, 2 weeks, you leave it open. Sean, what do you do in Tabreed?
We I think gave a 2-week period. We debated that we didn't want it to be too short a timeline, but equally, sometimes the longer a timeline you give, you know, people put it off till the end of the process anyway. So yeah, we had the board meeting, give them the heads up it was coming, released the questionnaire later in that week, and then give 2 weeks to respond. And I think when we were getting to the end of the period, everyone would respond except 1 or 2. We followed up directly to get their inputs. The other response, just picking up on one of your questions earlier, Dr. Ashraf, was when we report back, we don't attribute the comments to individuals. You know, so hopefully that's not too pointed. In any case, I mean, it was a pretty collaborative discussion. And actually, just noting on Philip's point earlier as well, you're absolutely right that having your chairman's or chairwoman's buy-in is so important because it legitimizes the whole process. Now, further legitimacy is being added by the fact that ESCA are regulating it and requiring it of us. So to the extent there was a debate before, that also closes the debate on the relevance of it. It's essential, it's regulated and required, and therefore we do it.
Amanda, in your case, how long do you leave for directors to respond to the questionnaire?
I think it was about 2 weeks, but because I started the process early, I gave them a little bit more time, and I had to follow up on a couple of responses. But it was the board members were generally cooperative, and I got my feedback pretty fast, which gave enough time to do the analysis.
Perfect. Now, Philip Armstrong, to put this into perspective, I mean, the idea of board evaluation is not really something which is in a vacuum, if you like. Now, how do we make sure that, you know, board evaluation is aligned with the corporate governance structure of the company itself, or how does it impact the governance performance of the company? So now you talk about board evaluation, but then you talk about governance as well, in general, in the company itself. How are these two related, if they are? You are muted, Phil. You are muted.
I mean, the essence of a board performance review, and I refer very often to it being a performance review, is because it's very focused on how the board collectively and how the board individually is fulfilling its governance responsibilities, both as a board, to the organization, and of course to its shareholders. So it's very much part of the governance process, in my view, because the issue is ensuring that there's a level of accountability inherent in each board member's understanding of their role and function on the board, and that collectively that contributes to an aligned level of thinking among board members with management. So it's not just management who held to account for their performance or otherwise, but the board members really set the tone. So the short answer to your question is a board performance review is very much part of the governance process. And in fact, I would even go so far as to say it's quite critical to the process, because it ensures, it's always ensuring that the board ultimately should set the tone for the organization. It's a body that has to report or respond to shareholders at annual general meetings or in any other interventions that investors may take, particularly with a listed company or in the banking sector, very often with the regulator. So, and it's a question of continuous improvement. It's a question of trying to, or at least not trying, but ensuring that each individual board member and the board collectively is on top of not only existing and prevailing issues, but also using it as an opportunity to assess and evaluate the future, you know, in terms of future strategic directions, future operational priorities. As we know, we live in a turbulent world now. Things change, and they change quickly. And is the board ready to be able to deal with that? And has it got the skills and competencies on the board? And a lot of the current evaluations not only center around the board composition and competencies as aligned to the strategy, both current and future, but also there's greater focus on also evaluating the board chair and directors individually. And there's various ways in which that can be conducted. But importantly, as I mentioned earlier, is also the role of the committees and the effectiveness that they are fulfilling their functions in support of the board's overall function. Because I think in this day and age, and in this increasingly complex, political and economic environment, the board really has its hands full, and the role of the committees is critical to that. And all of that really forms essentially the central pivot of any of your governance systems and structures. At least that's my view.
Yeah. Now, the question to the three of you actually is, again, because Mohammed, Junaid, and you also mentioned investors as well, and that investors pay attention to board evaluations. Now, one of the areas where investors are very keen to verify, especially minority investors, is the independence of board members. Now, is the board evaluation is where we should also give investors a message about how independent these independent directors are, or this is not the place for it? I mean, it's any of you actually. Sean, we can start with you, interpret.
Yeah, look, I mean, I guess that is also reported through the annual report, integrated report that's prepared, the independence of directors. Yeah, I mean, whether we put it in this section on the board evaluation, for me, might depend upon whether it was something that we assessed was problematic or not. But if it's not problematic and it's reported elsewhere, I probably wouldn't go into it in detail. I think this is a conversation between the board. I think everyone who participates in these board processes will know that the board meetings can be so time pressured. There's so much to get through. You have a finite amount of time. So I think one of the real advantages of this process is that you hopefully carve out a bit of time to have these conversations. It's great for new members on the board because it accelerates their learning and allows them a platform on which to make observations as well. And then to have this sort of put through the integrated report, I think is the new initiative from ESCA and one that we'll seek to follow.
Amanda, would you like to speak?
Yes. Following up on what Sean said, we do not report on independence in the board evaluation because we report on a quarterly basis at the board level, at the NRC level, the board composition and independence, and in turn this is communicated to the public in the annual report and the governance report. So we focus the board evaluation more on the board process, on strategic oversight, on all the other areas that need to be assessed and evaluated. But in my experience, I did not go through independence in the board evaluation because there was really nothing reported at the board level and at the NRC level that was worth focusing on in the board evaluation with respect to independence. Now, maybe this is an area that we would want to consider research a little bit more about to see if it is worth including in the next assessment. But for now, it is being communicated to our shareholders and stakeholders in the governance report.
Now, Philip, coming from Gavi, I mean, do you think that the board assessment report is a place where you can assure investors how independent really the independent directors are? Because I know that you can say that he or she is independent, but in reality, investors have other ways of trying to find out whether this really is independent or is he or she, affiliated with one of the major shareholders, for example, in the company.
In my experience, the assessing or evaluating the independence of your board members doesn't really find itself in a board performance review. Expanding on what Sean and Amanda have both said, the process is really focused on alignment within the board around priorities and issues facing the board and circumstances that we've already discussed. Where I have found the independence question come is in when you undertake individual evaluations where directors essentially evaluate one another's performance. There's a much more sensitive and delicate process that has to be very carefully handled, in my view. And as I said, and if you haven't got a strong chair, and very often it's done with an independent service provider, it can become a source of tension rather than a positive outcome. So I would see it more in that process. I also say that most companies, well-run companies, have their related party rules, which are also governed, of course, by law and regulations. There's issues of your conflicts of interest declarations that board members have to provide. There's a range of other measures and mechanisms which I think are sort of more suited to evaluating that independence process. The only time that I've seen an independence issue sort of primarily come up outside of an investor inquiry, because as you say, they also know what's going on outside in the marketplace, is possibly where there's a sort of vexed issue about tenure, the length of time that a board member has served on a board, and then questions arise around that, possibly among board members themselves, but more likely among your outside shareholders. That would be certainly my experience.
Now, the question for Sean and Amanda, I mean, just again to let everyone who is here with us in this webinar knows that you know, in the UAE you do have the two regulations, one by the central bank, which is mandating 3 levels of assessment, board members, committees, as well as individual, so the board, committees, and individual directors. ESCA actually doesn't go to that detail, so they say board and committees. Now, you are two companies. Do you ever think that taking this individual board assessment might be something that you'd like to consider, might be useful for you, despite it is not mandated by ESCA in this case, although by the central bank for banks and financial institutions?
Shall I go first? To be honest, I think we will mirror the ESCA position currently. So last year we did the board. Previously, we hadn't targeted the board committees, but we did that this year, which is good because I mean that's an integral part of the board process as well. And we got some good suggestions coming out of that from amongst the committee, which were then discussed with the wider board. Going on an individual basis, I suspect we would respond if that was regulated as a requirement. I mean, Ashraf, you mentioned earlier the burden of the board secretary. It's another level of administration and process to add to that process, which of course we would do, but I'm not sure I would necessarily rush to volunteer to do it. But of course, we'll listen to what the market's doing as well and what's asked of us and respond to that.
Amanda?
Okay, so in my case, all the evaluations we did, they focused on the board and the committees and not on individual directors. Perhaps this is something that I would look to do through an external assessor rather than when we conducted internally, just to avoid sensitivities. Now, the ultimate purpose is to ensure that we have a good and efficient board process, and I'm sure our board will do what needs to be done to ensure that our board is aligned. Now, the individual evaluation and peer reviews are a little bit more sensitive. So perhaps if it is done externally and reported on in a proper manner, I believe it would be very beneficial for the company. So, but I don't know how the reporting will be when we report it in the governance report. Perhaps it will be more general rather than specific to each director.
Definitely, yes. Actually, the reason why I'm asking is simply because despite that, I mean, it is board evaluation is mandated by ESCA and Central Bank. We still have lots of companies who come to us who are not listed companies and they would like to do board evaluations. So for them, it's not really any mandate. It's they feel that it's good for us to assess our own board so that we can see areas in which we can improve. That's why I thought that sometimes companies will take that step to do something which is voluntary for them. It's not really required or mandated by law. Now, we have only a couple of minutes left. So I think the last thing I would like to do is to give each one of you maybe a final word to say from your experience, what are the key challenges and advice that you'd like to give to people who are here with us when they consider or they start the idea of board evaluations? Phil, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different issues there, but very quickly, to me, the points are, as I've probably already raised and been emphasized by Sean and Amanda, is the support of the board chair throughout the process and being willing to take what can sometimes be some very difficult decisions, particularly as it will test allegiances and friendships on the board if the process is done honestly. The other one is to focus as much on the outcomes as it is just the process itself. I think increasingly in the more sophisticated board evaluation processes, a lot of it is around the outcomes and then the follow-up process that takes place thereafter around a range of different issues that one can discuss. The other one is equality, where you do use independent service providers. I think one has to be very careful about the quality of those evaluators and whether they're going to bring this experience that you're seeking and value that you want to derive from the process. So, and it is an area that has some controversy, particularly in the United Kingdom, for example. And I think that the fourth one is also to remember a lot of the more advanced processes now involve interviews with directors. So it's not just the process of the questionnaire and allowing that, but then to interrogate the questionnaires with the respective individual directors, and that is then brings in the question of anonymity and how you highlight that. So it's a particularly difficult area, but it is an area where you derive a significant amount of interesting information, not necessarily shared openly in a sort of more formulaic process. The other one is the increasing reference to management and their input on their perspectives on the board. And in one process I did, which was a very intensive process, some of the outcomes there surprised the board in terms of how management was seeing the board's performance, which was a very interesting discussion that led to a very positive outcome from there. I think those are very quickly some of the thoughts that I would consider, particularly around challenges of a board process review.
Thank you, Philip. Amanda?
Yes, so I wanted to focus on the importance of looking at the primary purpose and the outcome of the evaluation rather than consider it as an administrative process of gathering and analyzing the information, because ultimately we're doing this for a reason, not only to fulfill the requirement of conducting an evaluation. So when we identify what we're looking for in an evaluation, we need to focus even more on the outcome and on the actions taken after that, the developmental actions, the training, the workshops, the ongoing support by the board secretary and by any external parties where needed or advisors. So the focus is not only on the process, but rather on the outcome. And it would be also very helpful if in parallel with the board evaluation, we conduct an exercise where we collect the skills, like prepare a skill set matrix. So along with the skills and of the board members and the outcome of the evaluation, we will be in a better position to see if our board is equipped to take the company to the next level, to take it forward, rather than just continue with the process of holding meetings, approving financials, doing only the bare minimum and the legal requirements, rather than guide the company and management. So I would focus on this area.
Thank you so much. Sean?
Yeah, that's all very comprehensive and agree with all of that. I think the quality of the inputs you get into the questionnaire process will go into the quality of the discussion you have at the end of it. So I would, as a top tip, say take it to the board early to say what you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and then just ask for them to participate. And with the support of your chairman and hopefully with all of the board members, you can have a positive process and hopefully it leads to some really good tangible outputs for the business.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Phil, Amanda, and Sean for these excellent insights. Actually, I think you gave a lot of excellent takeaways for those who are participating with us. Now, this has been recorded and we'll, of course, put this online as well. So thank you so much for your time. We are very happy to receive any questions or queries. If you'd like to contact the regulator, we're very happy to help you there. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you in other webinars.